is this all right?
So that's the laser and that's change slides.
Okay, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm going to share with you some of the findings from my recently completed PhD project, which looked at the conservation biology of the sandhill dunnart. And at this point, I'd just like to acknowledge my co-authors, particularly Stephen Deline and Jasmine Packer, who I don't think actually were on the abstract, but were quite important in this project. And specifically today, we're going to share with you some of the findings that I found out about the habitat preferences of this species, how this related to time since fire of the vegetation, and finally, how they might be applied to management of the species. So firstly, I have the pleasure to introduce to you the sandhill dunnart. I'm very fond of this little critter, and I think it's just amazing, which is probably, a good thing. I spent 5 years on it, so yeah. So it's a small carnivorous marsupial. It mainly eats invertebrates. It's classified as endangered within Australia, and it's known from only 3 locations currently. As you can see on the map here, there's 2 in South Australia, so it's pretty important for us to know what's happening with this species. So before the study commenced, almost nothing was known about the species. It was originally found back in the late 1800s by Spencer and the Horn expedition, where someone kicked it with a boot, I'm told. So yes, so since then it's popped up here and there, but no one really knew much about the ecology. And so no management plans have been implemented for this species. So one area that we considered important for the conservation management was defining what constitutes as good dunnart habitat. It's an easy question, but a hard one to answer. So previous surveys had suggested that the species has a close affinity with Spinifex, and possibly that dunnarts were using quite large Spinifex and maybe avoiding the older growth where the Spinifex has started to break down. So given the flammable nature of Spinifex and the system, and also suggestions from previous work, we decided to investigate if the habitat preference of the dunnart was related to time since fire of the vegetation, and then to investigate a little bit more closely at a finer scale to see if there was something more subtle in the vegetation structure that might be help explain the dunnart abundance in this area. So our study site was one of the core sandhill dunnart populations in South Australia. Those of you familiar with this region, it's west of the Middleback Ranges and on Eyre Peninsula in South Australia. So the region consists of parallel sand dunes, and the vegetation is dominated by Spinifex, mallee eucalypts and other shrubs like Hakea and Grevillea. Across this area, we chose 11 sites over approximately 24,000 hectares, and that consisted of 8 sites in Ironstone Hill Conservation Park and 3 sites in adjacent private land. So during 2 years, I went out and captured these dunnarts once a month for 2 years, and we tracked changes in dunnart presence and abundance at each of the sites. And during this time, we caught 241 captures of 107 individuals. Thank you. It seems like not much, but this species is really hard to catch. So our study site consisted of 4 different ages post-fire, and so we selected sites within each age class to determine if habitat preference was being driven by time since fire. So we had two sites in 7 years post-fire in the red here, 4 sites in 20 years post-fire in the brown, 2 sites in 39 years post-fire in the yellow, and finally 3 sites in this really old growth that we thought maybe they were avoiding. So we conducted a once-off habitat survey using some pole touches, quadrats, and some very elaborate hula hooping, as I'm demonstrating there. It's imperative for habitat analysis. So as well as the 4 fire ages of each across the sites, we also ended up with a suite of 9 habitat variables at a transect scale. So each site was made up of 4 different transects to see, and these variables we thought might be important for for sandhill dunnart abundance. So they were split into ground cover, things like bare ground, leaf litter and logs, the understory, shrubs and the spinifex, and then an overstory, which would combine the canopy of the shrubs and mallee, and then a mallee stem density as well. We also included a couple of other variables that we thought might be important in predicting sandhill dunnart's abundance, and that included the average height of spinifex. Through some other work, it was kind of considered they might be going for these big spinifex clumps for nesting in particular, so that might be an important factor, and also a habitat complexity index. So looking at the vertical structure of the habitat, starting from the ground and going all the way up to the canopy, and kind of giving a score between, you know, zero complexity, it's just sand, to really complex when there's lots of different layers made up of shrubs, leaf litter, logs, the whole lot. So we thought this might be important if it's quite an open area, semi-arid areas, and if you have more complex things to work around, hopefully you can avoid predators better. So I'd like to start with what we found with the habitat preferences related to time since fire, and the crux of it is not much really. We didn't find a significant influence on dunnart abundance, but we did find dunnarts at all the sites and all the age classes, so that kind of works out. But why was this? It's possible that there wasn't enough variation in our vegetation classes. So as you saw from the photos, you may have picked it up, that 7 years looks quite different. The others quite similar really in structure. So we were kind of almost, statistically speaking, we only really had 2 different structures there to work with. And so it could be possible that most of the changes in the vegetation structure that the dunnarts are responding to is happening prior to 7 years post-fire. So ideally, if we did this again, it would be lovely to have some more sites that are of a younger age class, so we can really determine when dunnarts start using that habitat again after fire. So now move on to some of the fine scale we did. So this was at the transact level rather than the site level. And this, don't pay too much attention, but these are the modelling results from the modelling we did, and of those habitat variables I explained earlier. So the main thing to pick up here is that these are the 3 top models in this red box, and they consist of habitat complexity index, the average spinifex height, and logs. So these all are quite interesting. So we'll have a bit of a look as to why that might be the case. So this graph shows a similar sort of thing, but in a slightly different way. So this is the relative importance of each habitat variable used in these models, and also the direction in which it was related to sandhill dunnart abundance. So we found that the 3 most important were logs, triodia, spinifex height, and habitat complexity. And logs can be quite easily explained, I think. It can be a good daytime refuge for these animals in these sort of landscapes, and researchers in Western Australia working on dunnarts, or sandhill dunnarts, have just found them in logs resting during the day. So it's kind of a known thing now, so that's great. That's come out in the models. And they can also harbour invertebrates which they eat, so it's potentially a food source and also protection as the animals are moving through the habitat from predators. They were responding to a decrease in spinifex height, which is a bit counterintuitive when you first think about it, especially because we had other studies that suggested maybe they would like these bigger triodia spinifex bushes. So, but we've had a bit of a think, and as spinifex grows, it starts in the middle, it grows outwards, and it starts to die in the middle and becomes a lot less dense, and the structure starts to break down. So if you think about it from a dunnart's point of view, if I was a dunnart, which apparently I've been mistaken for recently actually, but it's a long story. Anyway, so if you were a dunnart, you'd prefer like the little, a really tight spinifex to like burrow into and make sure that you're safe from predators. So I think that might be what that's kind of explaining. Like none of these spinifex bushes were really small, they were kind of a medium size. It just has come out like that in the model. So I think that's the way to explain that. So as a protection, a daytime refuge, and also to harbour invertebrates again, potentially as a food resource. And finally, habitat complexity. As I explained before, we were considering it might be good if in a quite an open environment, if the habitat's more complex, you can avoid predators better as you move through it. It's also, in other studies I've read in papers, been correlated with an increase in invertebrate numbers as well. So again, another food resource. So the big question of the day is, what does this have to do with management? So we didn't detect an influence of time since fire, but we did detect this kind of preference for a structurally complex habitat. And I think we have to think about in the future, given the challenges we're likely to face with climate change and increasing frequency of wildfire potentially, that frequent burning of these areas could be actually detrimental to the sandhill dunnart. So we need to look at, in the management plans, putting some actions in there to prevent frequent burning of these areas. And also we've got a couple of tips now for surveying a bit wider for the sandhill dunnart and seeing if we can pick it up in some other areas as well. So finally, I'd like just to acknowledge my funding bodies without whom this would not have happened. Many thanks to Duna for access to Ironstone Hill Conservation Park, the private landowners for access to their property, the many field volunteers, and of course the dunnarts that I harassed for 2 years to get this data for you. And just as a quick plug, we have some papers coming out soon, so if you'd like more information, please feel free to email me, and happy to send drafts or papers when they finally come available as well to you if you're interested. So thank you.
Yes. Do you know if the fire regime has changed over time in these areas?
From since European settlement, or?
Any time recently, up to 7 years?
I think since European settlement it has. Like the way we use the land is different, but I think it's more. I was kind of thinking more of a in the future, in the years to come, that this is going to become more of a bigger problem. So I don't know if you noticed, but 20 odd years ago, 80% of that park was just burnt right out, and the landowners tell me it burnt for something like 2 or 3 months. Like that was a massive wildfire they had through there. So if something were to come through again like that, I would be a bit worried. I think what we have to remember is maintaining continuous habitat. That's going to be the key important thing, personally. Yeah.
Go. I was just thought it was interesting that there didn't seem to be relationships to fire, the age of the vegetation, yet the structural complexity and the height of the Spinifex was significant. So they almost seem to be contrasting. You'd think as the older they got, the more complex and the habitat become, and the higher the Spinifex would be.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a little bit confusing. I think the small sample size has to come into play here a bit as well, and we just didn't have that kind of broad range of fire ages that would have been nice to see. But I think a lot of, from the reading and stuff I've done, those sort of characteristics that they're responding to seem to be kind of developed by about 20 years post-fire. Like there's a lot of structure already there, and you might start losing some structure even as they become really old. But there still seems to be, some like other things that start coming up then that they could be using as structure if the Troides starts to decline as well. So yeah, it is a bit confusing, I agree, and it does need a bit more work, I think. But yeah, does that explain it?
I wonder whether your sample sites were actually independent enough.
Well,
by age, because a lot of them look like they were right on the edge of different age classes.
Yeah, that's it, and it's the problem with landscape studies as well. You kind of have to work with what you've got out there. Absolutely. And it wasn't really an ideal setup to test fire age. The paper we've co-authored with Catherine Mosby, that was kind of set up with a bit more of a broader look at fire age. So that's kind of pulled out Troidia height as quite important in structure as well. So, but again, no real indication of a real cut, like fine points. This is the fire age they prefer.
Bill?
Further north you get 3 or 3 fourths Dasyura species. Did you get more than one Dasyura species? How did they try that between them if you did?
I did. So the Ningau yvonnier is out there, and little long-tailed dunnart, Dolatura, we caught in really low numbers. I have the capture data. I haven't analysed it yet. So that's another post-PhD thing that I will be looking at. But yeah, very good question.
Eric?
Have you ever thought about creating some buffer zones around these populations for fire, for a fire event, possibly, and stopping the wildfire coming through and wiping out the entire population?
Yes, and I believe Doona's done that now. So they've put in a fire break down the southern end of the conservation park. So I believe they did that 1 or 2 years ago now. Is that? Oh, you don't know? So I'm going to say they did that. Yeah. Well, they did. I've seen it. It's done.
2 years ago.
Oh, 2 years ago. Thank you. Yeah. Time moves too quickly these days.